Old retirement strategies are broken. The so called 4% withdrawal rule and the faulty 60/40 portfolio don't protect you. They lock you into scarcity and fear while the markets eat away at your life savings. If you keep relying on them, your retirement will collapse before you do. Give me 60 seconds and I'll share with you the new retirement strategy, one that's built for today's economy and that gives you confidence instead of anxiety. Hi, my name's Jason. I build retirement plans every week, and you'll want to stay till the end so that I can share with you the common pitfalls so that you can avoid them. So, when I'm talking about the new retirement strategy, it's really twofold. Number one is it needs to be comprehensive or holistic in nature. What do I mean by that? We don't want to just talk about your investments. We also want to have a plan for your income, your taxes, your healthcare, and your legacy. And these need to all work together. Secondly, we want to look at these five areas through today's lenses, okay? The markets and the economy as they sit today, the laws that are on the books today, and take into consideration all of the strategies and the information and the data that we've learned over the last several decades. Now, when we talk about investment, typically what people would talk about was the standard 60/40 portfolio. And what was that? Well, it was typically 60% stocks and 40% bonds, or sometimes 60% bonds and 40% stocks. And, back in the 80s and possibly even the early 90s, these types of portfolios worked pretty well. But what we've realized is this portfolio simply doesn't work anymore, not for retirees. And why is that? Well, it is because stocks and bonds have started to act alike. All right. In 2008, both stocks and bonds went down together. Into the 2020 COVID pandemic, both stocks and bonds went down together. And then we saw it again in 2022 during the inflation crisis and the kickoff of the Ukraine war. So, when we talk about the new retirement strategy when it comes to investment planning, we want to talk about building a truly diversified portfolio. What we want to build is a financial house. Okay, so the first part of the financial house is the roof. And when we say the roof, this is the bucket that is the most aggressive or we can achieve the most return. What are some examples of roof investments? Well, you can think of stocks just to keep it simple. And then we have the walls. And the walls investments are some of those more mediocre or moderate investments. So while stocks are going up and down like this, your wall investments or bonds, to give an example, are going more like this, all right? So we've got our roof and our walls. That's typically what most people had. That was the 60/40 portfolio that back in the day could work okay, but it doesn't work today for retirees. Because what we also need is, just like the house that you live in, we need a foundation. And what are some examples of foundation investments? These can be bank products like CDs or money markets. These can be insurance products, or these can be government backed securities like Treasury inflation protected securities. With foundation investments, we do not have any risk because we've transferred that risk to someone else, like the bank, like an insurance company, or like the federal government. So, why does this matter? Why do we want to have a roof, a walls, and a foundation? Well, the first reason that we want to have that is because of the risk return profile that we can experience. So, let's go through a little example. So, let's say for this amount of risk, you can get this amount return. Or to say it a different way, in order to get this much return, you've got to take on this much risk. But what if we were able to achieve the same amount of return, but we only had to take on that much risk, okay? This is a risk adjusted portfolio, or we take the smallest amount of risk to get the most amount of return. That is what we hope to achieve with a truly diversified portfolio that has a roof, a walls, and a foundation. So, if we're talking about you investing and having a portfolio that has a roof, a walls, and foundation, it means that you've saved well. You have something, and I would imagine after you walk out on light, you want to give that to someone or some organization, whether that's a church, a charity, some other type of nonprofit. Okay. So, In order to do that, you need to make sure things are in place. And that's why I want to encourage you to click the link below and download our free Quick Start Estate Planning Guide. The first page of this is very simple. It's 3 easy steps to get your beneficiaries in order. There's even a script of exactly what to ask and what to say so that you can start getting this in place today. So I want to encourage you to click that link below, and we'd love to send you that free Quick Start Estate Planning Guide. Okay, so next we're going to cover income planning because income planning is very, very important because it's making sure that you have the dollars coming in every month so that you can keep your standard of living. And what can threaten that? Well, one of the biggest threats or one of the biggest risks is something called sequence of returns risk. So, what is sequence of returns risk? Well, sequence of returns risk is the risk that your portfolio could be down in the earlier years of your retirement because you don't have as much time to make up or get back to zero or get back to where you were before in terms of your returns. So, having bad returns earlier in your retirement years, but then also sequence of returns risk really affects retirees because if markets are down and you still need income, you would have to sometimes be forced to lock in losses. So we have a solution. And that solution is something called foundation fueled income. So you might ask yourself, Jason, what do you mean when you say foundation fueled income? Well, what I mean is we want to have enough income in place for the next several years. And I would say, a good kind of plan for that is to have 3 to 5 years of income in place. A better would be have 5 to 10 years of income planning in place. And the best would be 10 to 15 years of income in place. So, what that does is we're talking about pulling our income from the foundation, and that's what gives us this solution, okay? That's what gives us the foundation fueled income. And what does this allow for? Well, it makes sure that we have our income planned out for the next several years so that we do not have to lock in losses when the market is down. Here's the other big part. If we're pulling our income from the foundation and we're not having to worry about locking in losses, we allow the roof and the walls to grow, okay? And we want our roof and the walls to grow. Why? Number one, they're our highest yielding assets, all right? They have the potential for the most returns. They have more potential for returns than foundation investments. What is the other part? Well, we need our assets to grow so that we can keep up with inflation. And the interesting thing about foundation fueled income is this is how pensions work, okay? If you have a pension or if you know somebody else who has a pension, they don't worry about that check coming in every month. Every month that pension check comes in. Well, that's because the pension company uses their version of foundation fueled income. But what they call it is liability driven investing. Okay. It's just a fancy term for something similar, a similar approach of lining up income we need in the short term, taken from our safest and lowest return assets. Next, we're going to talk about taxes. And when I talk about taxes, the new retirement strategy that we're referring to is looking forward, looking down the road. See, the issue with CPAs and accountants is their job is to look through the rear view, look backwards. Let's look over this last year. What income did you have last year? What deductions can we take for the last year? But in terms of this new retirement strategy that we want to be building an income plan around, a tax plan around, we want to be looking down the next 5 years, looking forward for the next 10, 30 years. We want to be proactive. We don't want to be reactive. So, what are some examples of this? The first is Roth conversions. So, what do I mean by Roth conversions? Well, most people have a lot of retirement account assets. Think of a 401k, an IRA, a 403b, or a 457a. There's a lot of different retirement plan accounts, okay? These are tax deferred accounts, meaning we put the money in, it grew and grew and grew, but we haven't paid taxes on it. So, what we want to think about doing is taking money from that bucket, the tax deferred bucket, and converting it into a Roth account, which is a tax-free bucket. Now, there are some parameters that you want to be made aware of in terms of a Roth, but once we get it into the Roth bucket, if we adhere to those guidelines, after that money continues to grow, we won't have to pay taxes on it. Another example of some of the things that we can do taking advantage of this new retirement strategy is something called QCDs. So you may ask me, Jason, what are QCDs? Well, that's a qualified charitable distribution. And what it refers to is once you get to RMD age, required minimum distribution age, and it's different for everybody else, but right now it's about age 73. Okay. So when you get to that age, depending on your birthday, with that tax deferred money that you have that's in your IRA, for example, the federal government says, hey, you haven't paid us taxes on this, so we're going to make you take it out so that you can take it out and then pay us our taxes. But if you're charitably inclined, let's just say you give to your church every month, there is a very strategic thing that you can do where you can say, okay, well, instead of pulling out of this pocket, which is just out of my checking account, I can actually still contribute to my church or charity or some other qualifying nonprofit directly from my IRA. Why would we want to do that? Well, number one, we satisfy that distribution that the IRS wants us to do, that RMD, because we take it directly from our IRA and send it directly to our charity. So we actually took that distribution, but then we didn't pay taxes on it. So we didn't pay taxes. We were able to satisfy the federal government with that RMD, that required minimum distribution, and we were able to help out that church or that charity. And one other example that I want to highlight when we're talking about tax planning within this new retirement strategy is making sure that we're being very, very cognizant about where we allocate our assets or asset allocation. So, what do I mean by asset allocation? Well, when we're talking about asset allocation, let's think about your IRA. Well, inside of your IRA, you may want to put some dividend paying stocks because that income that you receive every year, you're not going to get taxed on that because it's in the tax deferred account. Another example is if you do have a Roth account, because you did a Roth conversion or you contributed to a Roth over the years, you probably want to consider putting your highest growth assets or those high growth stocks in your Roth account because we want that to grow and grow and grow because once we pull it out, we're not going to have to pay taxes on it. So next we want to cover healthcare. And healthcare can be the biggest expense in retirement. And one of the biggest decisions that retirees have is the decision around Medicare. Should I go with Medigap or Medicare supplement or should I go with Medicare Advantage? And when you're looking at should I go the supplement route or the Medigap route, or should I go Medicare Advantage route, you want to look at three things, which is coverage, cost, and flexibility. And the nice thing about it is every year they have the open enrollment period. It's typically from about mid-October to the early point part of December. So you want to be talking with someone that really understands this area and you want to make sure that they're product agnostic, where it doesn't matter if they recommend Medigap or the Medicare supplement or if they recommend Medicare Advantage. You want to make sure you're doing something that's in your best interest, not theirs. The other point that I really want to make in terms of this new retirement strategy is being smart about something called IRMA. So, what is IRMA? IRMA is an acronym for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. And it's very, very important because what it means is if you're not careful in terms of your income planning and your tax planning, you can end up paying more for Medicare than you otherwise would have. And you don't get any more benefits, you don't get a bigger network, you just pay more for the same thing that your neighbor gets. And this is an area that I see a lot of retirees end up getting surprised by, but whether they're managing things themselves or they're working with an advisor that really doesn't look at things holistically, is if you end up doing Roth conversions or you're not really looking at your income, you can end up triggering that IRMA, which means you can end up paying for more and you don't get anything additional for it. Okay. And then lastly, in terms of this new retirement strategy that's changing the game, it's really going back to the fundamentals when we're talking about legacy. And we're talking about legacy planning, we're talking about when you walk out on life, okay? Whenever you walk out on life, I would imagine you're like all the other retirees I know. You don't want your estate to go to probate because then it's going to be public record. There's court cost. A lot of times you can have fighting amongst the families, or things go to people that you didn't want them to go to. So, the number one step, or the biggest thing that you want to look at, is sitting down with a qualified estate planning attorney and getting your estate documents in order. Okay, so what do I mean whenever I say legal documents? Well, in general, it typically covers four different types of documents. It is a last will and testament, a living will, a healthcare power of attorney, and a financial power of attorney. It can also mean a trust if that makes sense for you and your family. Because what are we really talking about whenever we're dealing with estate documents, whenever we're dealing with legacy planning? We're talking about your beneficiaries. And when I talk about your beneficiaries, I want to refer back to that quick start estate planning guide that you can get free if you click that link below, because the first page really gets in place and gives you those three easy steps to start to get your beneficiaries in order. And the rest of the guide is just a guide to put all of your information in one place so that you've got it all there. You can go sit down with a qualified estate planning attorney, and then you can get your legal documents in place. I hope that this was helpful so that you understand that there's a new retirement strategy out there that can give you confidence instead of anxiety. And I want to invite you to click this video here where I go over the 10 beneficiary mistakes that retirees often make.